Genetics lesson number 1 for Monday, April 6th. This is focusing on Punnett squares and looking at how traits are passed down from parent to offspring, but also probability of those traits as showing up within the offspring. Today's lesson, you are going to need your Harry Potter genetics handout, and this will be a continuation off of last lesson. If you have a printout, you'll continue to fill this in. If you do not have a printout and no access to a printer, I do have that fill-in PDF. Make sure you save it to your drive so that you can access it later on. But the only thing that you will not be able to fill in is the final Punnett square problems, which we'll go over, but that will be turned in. I'll explain that when we get to that part. So let's take a look at inherited genetic traits that are actually described in Harry Potter series. And what I'm going to read for you is 4 excerpts from the different books that describe the different characters. And of course, what authors try to do is to give us enough description to allow us to picture that character in our head. And so they have to be very specific. So here's the first one. All of the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford. And that was said by Draco Malfoy in the first book of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in chapter 6. Next one is, he was almost twice as tall as a normal man and at least 5 times as wide. And that was actually describing Hagrid in Sorcerer's Stone chapter 1. Harry had a thin face, knobby knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. That was a description of Harry Potter in Sorcerer's Stone chapter 1. And finally, a pale boy with pointed face and white blonde hair. Draco greatly resembled his father. His mother was blonde too. And this was in the 4th book, Goblet of Fire, in chapter 8. So for this, the descriptions are showing us talking about hair color. It also mentions eye color, height, and freckles. Okay. So those are the ones that are described in the excerpts. Of course, there's obviously more because there's a lot more characters, but these are the ones that we're going to be focusing on for today's lesson. Now, for phenotypes, this is a new concept. Phenotypes is how we can actually describe some of those traits. And these are known as observable traits. So observable traits are ones that we can actually see. These are ones that show up. These are ones that you can see when you look in the mirror. And so these are physical, is how I like to describe them. Sorry, my pen is not working right now. So they're described as physical. I also like to describe it as, because it has an F sound at the beginning of phenotype, this is what we can also see on your face. Okay, so this is something we can see right away. We can determine whether or not you have a certain trait. And so the phenotypes, again, would height, eye color, or hair color, and freckles. So a trait can be described in two ways. Again, that first type, it would be a phenotype. These are observable, resulting from how one's genes are actually expressed. So again, this would be hair color, talent. This could be a genetic disorders like sickle cell disease, etc. Now, what can be the same or a little bit different would be the genotype, and that's consistent of the two letters that represent genes allele pair that result in the phenotype. Okay, so it results in that phenotype. And gene, if we take a look at that first portion of the word geno, that is literally the genes. They may be similar, they might be different. You'll see that on the next page. So first of all, for freckles, two possible phenotypes to actually have freckles or no freckles. These are both observable, has freckles or no freckles. Now, when it comes to the genotypes, that has to do with the different alleles that are present to express that gene. And we talked about in the last lesson the capital and lowercase letters. And so the genotype for freckles is indicated by two alleles in one of the genes that causes freckles. The possible alleles using the first letter of the trait F are, we're going to use that capital letter, which is also known as a dominant trait or dominant allele. And even if they have just one dominant allele, that individual is going to have freckles. And then we have a lowercase f that is known as a recessive trait, or it is the weaker gene, and it easily gets covered up. And so we have an individual that has no freckles, but they need to have two of these lowercase f's or recessive alleles in order to have no freckles. And so those possibilities of the different genotypes, if we list these out, we will have two capital F's. Again, that will equal that the child will have freckles. They can have an uppercase F and a lowercase f. This also has freckles. And then finally, you can have two lowercase f's, which then have no freckles. So they're asking you, what are the different combinations of the genes or that genotype? So you'll see, even though there's three combinations of genes that could possibly happen, we only have two phenotypes that are possible within the offspring. And again, using uppercase F, lowercase f, what are the possible genotypes? So again, we have the possibility of two uppercase, an uppercase and a lowercase, and two lowercase. And so one dominant allele or an uppercase F is sufficient for its trait. For somebody to have freckles to be observable, both alleles have to be recessive for recessive trait, or no freckles in this case, to be observable. So they can't have one of those dominant alleles because the dominant alleles covers up recessive alleles. So let's take a look at a couple of examples before we get to, or actually practicing what's known as a Punnett square. So this will be before. So in one of the genes that determines hair color, red hair is recessive to brown hair. One way to describe these hair color alleles are, we're going to use lowercase r for red, and for brown hair, we're going to use an uppercase r. So using lowercase r for red hair and uppercase R for brown hair alleles, what are the possible genotypes of the allele pair are there? And so similar to the freckles, what we're going to do is we're going to list every combination that is possible. So of course, let me grab my pen here again. So for the genotypes, this is what would be along with the genes. And so we could have two uppercase R's. If we go over to phenotype, that would be brown hair. We could have an uppercase and a lowercase. And again, they have brown. And then they can have two lowercase r's for red hair. Okay. Now, this is a very simple way of looking at hair color. We know it's a little bit more complicated than that, but for just purposes of introducing this whole idea, we're going to pretend that hair color is only one or the other for this. Of course, it is more complicated. We'll get to that later on. And so this whole process of deciding what is the possibility of passing down a trait to a child, we can actually look at probability by working with Punnett squares. And these are a really simple prediction diagram that I'm going to show you. There's a couple questions we're going to do all together, and then you're going to have a couple that are actually your assignment for this, which you are going to post in Google Classroom, or you can also submit it through Nearpod in the drawing function. So you'll see that in two different locations. So here is our first one. So Punnett square for freckles case number 1. Mom has freckles and dad has none, and each parent has a homozygous genotype, the two alleles in the gene that are the same. And so here's a new term for us that we haven't talked about before, which is homozygous. Okay, and so that gives us a clue as to what is the genotype for one, or in this case, both parents. And so we take the root word. So we have homozygous. Okay, and we take that first portion of the word, which is homo, and that means same. And so for this one, it tells us that we know that one parent has freckles, one does not. Both are homozygous for their trait. And so with mom having freckles, we can see, we know automatically that with mom being homozygous dominant, she's going to have two uppercase letters. Okay. Now dad is homozygous for the genotype for no freckles, so he has two lowercase f's, or lowercase alleles. So what we can do is we're going to build a Punnett square, and that is really simple. So essentially, you're going to draw a square, and you're going to split this up into 4 sections. So then what we want to do is we want to put one parent going along the top, because again, they're going to pass down only one allele to offspring. Okay. And so we're going to split those up, and then, so I have mom up here at the top, and then dad going along the side. And so to find out the probability of what their offspring are going to have, I'm going to then pair up each of those genotypes into each of the squares. And so what I do is I start at the upper left corner, and I'm going to actually, my smartboard's not being so smart right now. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to take each of these and I'm going to bring them together into the square. Now, if there's a capital letter, we always know that capital letters go at the beginning of the sentence. And if we have one in genetics, they are going to go first. Same thing for over here. So we keep going where I have what is on the top here, this top letter, and we are still using this one. Then we fill in the bottom. Again, we take the capital letter from the top of the square, and we take the lowercase f from the left side, and then we do that one more time here. Okay, so the uppercase F and the lowercase f to combine them. And so when talking about phenotypes with this, and we can shorten it to PHENO for pheno, and we can shorten it to geno for genotype. So that with the phenotype, again, this is what's physical. It'd be 100% freckles. Okay, and for the genotype, in this case, we have 100% uppercase and lowercase. Okay, so this is what the offspring are going to have. Let's do a second case here. So what happens if both mom and dad have freckles? Now, in this case, they're talking about their genotypes as being heterozygous. And so hetero, that root is going to be defined as different. So they're talking about the alleles. Now, when we describe something as different or heterozygous, the two alleles are actually they're going to be passing down one dominant allele, or capital F, each. They each have one. And they're going to pass down one recessive allele. So, and that's where we get their genotypes. Again, we're going to draw a Punnett square to see what their genotype and phenotypes type probability is for passing down to their children. So we'd create that square once again. And we split up each of those alleles because parents can only pass down one allele to their offspring. And then we combine them. So this case, we have two uppercase F's in this box. We have an uppercase and a lowercase, an uppercase and a lowercase. We have two lowercase alleles. Now, when it comes to their genotype and phenotype, this is where it gets to be a little bit more confusing, but this will take some practice. So we have phenotype, and that would be what shows up. And so when we're talking about probability, we talk about percentages. And so because we've divided our box into 4, each one, if this is 100%, all of this here, each of these boxes are going to be equal to 25% each. And so when we're talking about what is physically showing, we have 75% chance of having an offspring with freckles. It's when we get to the genotype where that changes. So if this is the case for our genotype, we have a possibility of 3 different genotypes that are going to get passed down, which we can see right in our Punnett square. So we have 25% where we have homozygous dominant, or 2 uppercase Fs. We have 50% heterozygous, or where we have different we have 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, and then finally we have 25% that is homozygous recessive, or 2 lowercase f's. So what you're going to do next is you have 2 questions practicing Punnett squares, actually 3. One is talking about the Weasley family with freckles and red hair. Now this first one, your handout only has 2 Punnett squares, but especially when it comes to the freckles, there are 2 possible Punnett squares. So I'm going to have you take on that challenge and see if you can figure that out. And then you have 2 questions on the Potter's hair colors. And so we're going to practice those. Again, you can submit those through Nearpod in the drawing mode. You'll see those in later slides. Or you can do this by hand on your handout and then snap a picture and email it or attach it to your Google Classroom assignment.